Natural disasters are usually caused by the natural processes occurring on Earth. Lack of information, lack of clarity, and lack of anticipation on behalf of the authorities that how much crowd can gather. One of the few developing countries which has dedicated forces for disaster response. In education, we always talk about gender equality because girls should also have access to opportunities. In terms of power generation, we are about 47% of our electricity still comes from coal. Ecologically sensitive zones are along India's coastline, so they are covered under coastal regulation zones. Very good morning, all of you. Today we are going to cover the environment and disaster management related questions which have been asked by the UPPCS mains examination in the past 2 years. So let's start with the questions which were asked in 2023. The first question that was asked is a 12-marker question. It says, distinguish between natural and man-made disasters. Also elucidate the effectiveness of the disaster management system in India. Now, disasters, as you all know, is an event or a calamity which causes a disproportionate loss of life and property. Now, disasters can be classified into two categories, which is man-made and natural disasters. Natural disasters are usually caused by the natural processes occurring on Earth. So whenever the word nature comes in, you have to mention the fact that natural processes are to be blamed for this, or rather accounted for. Triggering factors could be such as geological, for example, seismic events, or meteorological, or biological. These are the main triggering factors. There is very little or almost no negligible human control when it comes to natural disasters, because we cannot control tsunamis, we cannot control earthquakes, we cannot prevent them. We can only be better prepared for them. The predictability of natural disasters varies from disaster to disaster. So, for example, in the case of an earthquake or a seismic event, it is a little less likely that one can predict. Same is the case for tsunamis. But cyclones, other weather-related phenomena has become relatively better predictable, especially with the advancements in technology that we see. For example, the application of Doppler weather radars, and of course other technological advancements, because of which we have been able to better predict. So predictability in terms of seismic events is relatively less, but other climate-related phenomena is still we are better off. The frequency of natural disasters cannot be controlled. So you cannot control the number of seismic events, you cannot control the number of cyclones, volcanoes, none of these can be controlled. The speed can be either sudden or slow. Slow in the case of, let's say, naturally occurring droughts. Droughts is an example of slow onset disaster. Drought does not happen in 1 hour or 1 day. It usually happens over a long period of time. So that is an example of slow onset of disaster. And then of course you can mention about the examples, you can talk about the environmental impact, etc. When we come to man-made disasters usually occur because of human negligence or failure to account for the accident or the event that may take place. So they are usually caused by human actions or anthropogenic causes. The different types of man-made disasters can be industrial, technological. So for example, we have seen Bhopal gas tragedy, we saw the LG polymers incident. All these causes are primarily industrial in nature. Technological, because of technological failure, and also sometimes, for example, political, or rather you can say crowd management. Crowd management or stampedes that we usually witness, they are responsible for crowd management, and stampedes are usually happen or occur because of lack of accountability, or rather lack of estimation of how the situation will pan out. Last year, unfortunately, we witnessed a number of stampedes in India, especially we all might remember the incident related to IPL, that is the the Bangalore team which won RCB. And because of this, the incident that took place, there was a number of deaths that took place, and that was primarily because of one simple human error that the RCB team had put it out on Twitter that the winning team will be coming to the stadium at so time. And the event was obviously not ticketed, it was free of cost, so there was a huge influx of people. So these kind of things where you are not able to anticipate the situation, where there is a sudden influx of people. Similar thing happened in Tirupati, Tirumala, religious places. This is primarily because of lack of information, lack of clarity, and lack of anticipation on behalf of the authorities that how much crowd can gather. Okay, this is largely preventable. So if you are taking into account the number of entry points, exit points, if you are taking into account if too much people come at one place, how the channelization of crowd will be done, then it is largely preventable. So for example, you can give an example of Kumbh Mela here. Kumbh is, again, we did see some events of stampede there as well, but more or less largely for its scale, the event was relatively better managed. So it can be preventable, it can be predictable also, and it is usually sudden. This is not a slow onset disaster. Man-made disasters, whether industrial, chemical, or whether related to crowd management, they are usually sudden. They just happen within a span of hours or minutes. Examples could be industrial accidents, oil spills, and they have a localized impact. The man-made disasters have a relatively smaller area impact, but it can have large-scale impact also. So for example, the Bhopal gas tragedy, still till date, we see a lot of cases of genetic variations coming from that area. It can have wide implications when it comes to nuclear or chemical disasters, but more or less as compared to natural disasters, they have a little lesser impact. Okay, and human liability is absolutely clear. This is 100% mainly on account of human actions. So let's go back to the question. Let's see what was the question asked by UPSC. The question says, distinguish between natural and man-made disasters. So if you are able to write 5 to 6 points or 6 to 7 points, that is good to justify. Maybe a starter answer with one definition of disasters, and elucidate the effectiveness of the disaster management system in India. Now, this is where bulk of the question lies. So let's try and answer this part of the question. I'm going to give you a brief about the disaster management system in India. Okay, so disaster management system in India follows a 3-tier structure. Disaster management in India follows a 3-tier structure, especially when it comes to the institutional framework. So if I talk about number 1, the institutional framework, or from the governance point of view, we have a 3-tier structure. At the central government, we had the National Disaster Management Authority. At the state level, we have the SDMA, and at the district level, we have the District Disaster Management Authority, which is led by the district collector. Apart from this, we have specialized forces which is the NDRF, that is the National Disaster Response Force, and the SDRF, the State Disaster Response Force. So this is specifically with respect to how the institutional framework of disaster management in India is divided according to the different governance levels in our country. And India is one of the few countries in the developing world, one of the few developing countries which has dedicated forces for disaster response. So this is the National Disaster Response Force and State Disaster Response Force. The other thing is, India's institutional framework has shifted from a relief-centric approach to preparedness-centric. From relief-centric to preparedness-centric. So the emphasis is on being prepared or becoming resilient towards disasters. Okay. On these lines, we have also become a party to the, or we follow the Sendai framework for disaster management. So Sendai framework, that India is very much following this, should definitely be a part of your answer. What else do we have when it comes to disaster management? Always remember, whenever there is a question related to disaster management, try and answer the question according to the disaster management cycle. So what happens? How do you prepare for a disaster before the actual event occurs? You talk about early warning systems. So we also have improved early warning systems. Some key examples that you can give is of IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, which gives information related to cyclones, heat waves, cold waves, droughts, etc. Okay, cloud bursts. These are all examples that you can attribute to IMD. Then you have the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. This specially deals with tsunami warnings. Tsunami warnings. And then you have the CWC, which deals with flood alerts. Okay, these are some of the bodies in India which are responsible for early warning dissemination, information dissemination. Okay, now this is pre-disaster. What happens after this is the post-disaster stage. So if we talk about the post-disaster stage, let's say the disaster has occurred. Once the disaster has occurred, the most important stage is relief and rescue. For relief and rescue, like I mentioned earlier, we have the NDRF and the SDRF. We have an incident response, incident response system. And we generally establish some sort of emergency cells or emergency headquarters, temporary helpline numbers. All that is generally done at the national level also and at the state level also, the local level also. And then relief and rescue is aided by use of technology. So now the question actually is very broad because it talks about the entire disaster management system. So you can not only mention about the governance and institutional measures and structures, but also the different kinds of technological inputs that help in providing relief at this stage. Next, we can talk about community participation. And capacity building. Community participation and capacity building. So, training of local volunteers. You have the Apada Mitra scheme, you should mention this. School safety program for training children in schools how to deal with different disasters, especially in their area. And NGOs, civil defense organizations, and self-help groups. So this is about all in all, this is how the disaster management system in India looks like. Okay, so, and of course, with respect to after community participation, capacity building, you can also talk about rehabilitation, reconstruction, in which all sorts of government organizations are involved, NBCC, other organizations are involved in setting the system back up. Okay, so this is regarding the overall disaster management system in India. We will first start with institutional framework. Here you can also talk a little bit about the legal framework. So if you want to talk about the legal framework, or rather the law-based, you can definitely mention the Disaster Management Act 2005, and you have the Disaster Management Plan. Okay, so these two documents are the main source of basically the inspiration for all other disaster preparedness documents in India. Apart from this, we have the disaster guidelines, disaster specific guidelines. So for example, NDMA has guidelines given related to flooding, related to urban flooding, related to cyclones. So disaster specific guidelines are also given by the National Disaster Management Authority. So you can mention about this. And of course, you can mention the fact that National Disaster Management Authority is supported by the National Executive Committee. Okay, this is regarding the entire disaster management system in India. Since this is a 12-marker question, you obviously may not have too much space and scope and time to write. So it's always good to probably draw a table and just mention the names, because that is also enough to tell the examiner that you are aware about the question and the important points in this. Okay. Apart from this, you can mention any other schemes, any other important local action plans that you are aware of in your answer. To conclude the answer, you can simply say that while disaster management in India has come a long way, especially from before, and especially because we can see the number of deaths, for example, or the number of loss of life that we are witnessing in, for example, cyclones has considerably reduced. But there is still much left when it comes to preparedness, when it comes to technological advancements, when it comes to different other disaster situations. We recently, unfortunately, saw the demise of a techie in Greater Noida for the lack of equipment, for the lack of technology. And these incidents make us realize that we still have a long way to go when it comes to disaster preparedness and management in India. Okay. So this is regarding the summary of disaster management. Let's go back to the question and see what the question entails. Next question that was asked by UPSC in 2023 was, describe the various efforts being made in India to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Different efforts. So we already know there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and it can be a bit tricky to address each one of them. Okay, so if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it starts from no poverty. You start with money. Okay, if you want to remember it, you remember it like this. You start with money. So money deals with poverty, or you know, having money or not having money. So that calls for poverty. Once money is there, the first thing you will talk about is food. All right, food followed by food will give you good health and well-being. Good health and well-being, once your health is sorted, then you will talk about education. In education, we always talk about gender equality, because girls should also have access to opportunities. Girls having access to education, especially going to schools, you can think about clean water and sanitation. So there is a story that you can build up in your mind to remember the different sustainable goals. Even if you don't remember the exact number and the goal, even if you remember the theme, you can just write the theme, and in front of the theme you can give in your answers what are the different schemes or steps taken by the government. So we will do that also in detail. Apart from that, seventh sustainable development goals deals with cleaner energy. Then once your education is done, we will talk about work and economic growth. Economic growth will lead to development of industry, innovation and infrastructure, and overall inequalities in the society will reduce, whether it is gender-based, class-based or any other way. Once the communities are settled, it will become, the whole cities and communities will become sustainable, and sustainable cities call for responsible consumption, not overproduction, not overconsumption. And this brings us to climate action, or totally caring for the earth. Climate should definitely have a subset of water and land. So once we talk about climate, we will separately talk about the ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, and on the land, that is terrestrial ecosystems. Finally, the last SDG deals with, when everything else is sorted, we talk about peace, justice and strong institutions. That means the overall governance, social framework of the world should be in the right order. Partnership for the goals. Okay, so partnership for achieving all these goals. So if I have to divide these sustainable development goals, I can broadly divide them into three categories. They are either environmental, environment dealing with climate change, responsible consumption, life on land, water, sustainable cities, affordable energy. These are all environment related sustainable development goals. Or you can divide them into social. Social means when we talk about poverty, hunger, reduced inequalities, gender equality, education, health, everything comes under social ambit. And finally, last is the governance. Under governance, we can talk about decent work, providing opportunities for economic growth, peace and justice, strong institutions, sustainable cities, infrastructure. All this comes under governance aspect also. So while one sustainable development goal can overlap into two categories, but broadly we can classify them under environmental, social and governance. So if you are also not able to remember the individual themes, you can answer your question on the basis of these larger, broader categories. Okay, so if I have to divide the sustainable development goal, the goal theme, what is the goal theme, and you can give some major initiatives or efforts related to it. This is how you can present your answer in a short span of time. Let's quickly see some important schemes related to each of the sustainable development goals. For poverty, to address poverty, then we can talk about any scheme or any initiative by the government that puts money in the pockets of people will be classified under this. So whether it is direct benefit transfer, whether it is employment schemes like Manrega, whether it is self-help groups, Garib Kalyan Yojana, anything that you feel, or Food Security Act that gives wheat grains, or whether it gives grains to the people at subsidized cost, anything that puts money or power into the hand of people, or the power to choose, that also comes under no poverty. Okay, so this comes under that. Zero hunger. Zero hunger, again you can talk about, let's say for again National Food Security Mission can again feature here. You can talk about midday meal scheme or PM Poshan Abhiyan, Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, again which talks about food grain dispersal. So all these things, functions come under zero hunger. Okay, good health and well-being, all the schemes, broader umbrella schemes of Ministry of Health, think about those. So Ayushman Bharat, National Health Mission, you can talk about Mission Indradhanush, Janani Suraksha Yojana, all major schemes, whether related to dispersal of vaccines, whether it is related to providing the ability for cashless treatment, anything that you can think of, all the umbrella schemes will come under this. Quality education. When we talk about education, you can mention National Education Policy. This you all very clearly remember. Then you have Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. You have many schemes under the education ambit also. So give examples, 4-5 examples is good. Gender equality, सबसे main जो everybody knows is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. You can talk about that. Mission Shakti, Ujjwala Yojana, Stand Up India. Stand Up India is usually for startups, but it has a component for women also. So any schemes that you know, especially, or you can talk about the funds also, for example, Nirbhaya Fund, etc. All this come under the gender equality. Okay. Clean water and sanitation, now we move to the Ministry of Jal Shakti. So Jal Jeevan Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, Amrut all come under this. Affordable and clean energy, think of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy or Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. So we can talk about National Solar Mission, you can talk about PM Kusun, which is the scheme for installation of solar panels in rural areas. All right. Then you have International Solar Alliance, all schemes related to PAT scheme, or you can think about other schemes such as production linked incentive schemes for solar panels, for wind turbines, all comes under this. Okay. SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Again, schemes which provide employment. So Skills India Mission, Startup India, Mudra Yojana for MSMEs, Make in India. These are all umbrella schemes. The examiner will just expect you to mention 2-3 key schemes for each of those points. But here the challenge is to remember this. So broadly, like I said, if you're not able to remember SDGs also, you can divide it into broader categories, environmental, social and governance, and within those you can mention the smaller ones. Okay. Industry, infrastructure, you have infrastructure pipeline, Atmanirbhar Bharat, Digital India. You can also mention here Sagarmala, Bharatmala, all those infrastructure related projects. Reduced inequalities, aspirational district program, this is very interesting. Then you have financial inclusion through Jan Dhan Yojana, so that there is equality. Okay, economic equality. Next, sustainable cities. We talk about the smart cities mission. This is very important. Swachh Bharat Urban, National Urban Transport Policy. Responsible consumption, so that there is not overconsumption. So this is a national action plan on sustainable consumption, but this is still being discussed. Waste management rules. So anything that talks with excess production of something and how it has to be disposed of comes under this. So your producer responsibility, extended producer responsibility framework, which is for plastics, which is for e-waste, which is for oil, all these comes under the EPR framework. So there are multiple objects or multiple domains which come under the EPR. Then climate action, you have the National Action Plan on Climate Change 2008, nationally determined contributions, that the pledge we have made in COP21 in Glasgow, where we have promised that, we have made 5 promises rather, and for example, which is we will move to a non-fossil fuel based 500 gigawatts of energy will come from non-fossil fuels. 50% of our energy requirements will be met by renewable sources. We will reduce the energy intensity of our economy by 45%. We will create a carbon sink of 2.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and we will become a net zero emissions economy by 2070. So these are the 5 pledges that we have made at the COP21 under NDCs. Lifestyle movement, life movement, this also deals with sustainable production and consumption. Life below water, all schemes related to water, especially with related to pollution. So you can mention those: National Coastal Mission, Blue Economic Policy, Coastal Regulation Zones, all this comes with it. Life on land, Green India Mission, National Afforestation Program, CAMPA or Compensatory Afforestation Management Program, all this comes under that. Peace, justice and institutions, this is interesting. You can talk about e-courts, digital governance, one-stop solutions, RTI Act, all come under good service delivery. Citizens charters, everything comes under this. And partnership for goals. How do we partner with other countries and other institutions for achieving these goals? So there are, example is International Solar Alliance, which India is one of the founding members of. International Big Cat Alliance, we can mention that as well. South-South cooperation, or you can talk about BRICS, you can talk about IPSA, you can talk about BIMSTEC. All these institutions come under this. G20, India recently led the G20 program also, summit last year. So all this can be mentioned when it comes to SDGs. Again, the question is very comprehensive, time will be short. So always remember, when you think of the theme, think of the relevant ministry. And with respect to the relevant ministry, think of the 2 or 3 umbrella schemes or flagship schemes of that ministry. Let's move on to the next question. The next question is, what steps are being taken to meet the continuously increasing demand of energy resources in India? Discuss with special reference to renewable and sustainable energy resources. So this is one topic which is definitely upcoming. Like I told you, India is a country with has huge emerging energy demands, and we need to shift our energy supply from fossil fuel based to non-fossil fuel based. So power generation in India. So how can India meet its rising power demand? These topics have been a lot in news. India's oil demand is growing fastest in the world. And power generation, India records the 3rd highest growth in power generation. In fact, it is said that by 2050, India will account for 12% of the global energy demand by 2050. So that is a huge number, which means India is a country which has rising power needs, and that is on account of economic growth and industrial expansion. There is population growth also and rising incomes, so more number of people means more energy required. Electrification of new sectors such as electric vehicles, industries, induction cooking, all these new appliances also demand electricity. Similarly, urbanization, lifestyle changes and urbanization. What women used to use, silbatta and other traditional appliances for cooking. Now they will, in urban areas, they use, let's say, mixer grinders or microwaves, etc. So that is also causing the increase in the demand of electricity. Digitalization and emerging technology, this is one very key aspect of rising energy needs, and that is because the more and more data that is being generated online every day, that has been stored, that is being collected. And to store that data, we need large-scale data storage centers, which are power guzzlers and water guzzlers also. They also take a lot of water because water is used for keeping them cool. So digitalization and emerging technologies also have a major role to play. So if I have to give you an example in this, do you know that one search on ChatGPT consumes 10 times electricity as compared to a simple Google search, which means the power is, more AI you use, the more power is being consumed. Policy push and clean energy transition, we are moving towards renewable energy. So that is also increasing our growth for requirement for energy. To give an idea about India's current energy basket, we know that the major share right now for, let's say, the primary energy supply, we are not talking about electricity, we are talking about total energy supply, whether we use coal directly and not for electricity generation. Directly, if we use primary energy supply, coal still accounts for 60%. Okay, so we still are dependent on heavily on fossil fuels. If you look at this picture, you will realize that in terms of power generation, while primary energy supply, we are 60% dependent on coal. In terms of power generation, we are about 47% of our electricity still comes from coal. Second rank goes to solar. So solar is picking up, but is, in terms of fossil, non-fossil, is very much lagging behind. Okay, over the years, the share is increasing, while the share of or the production of coal is also increasing, but not so much at the rapid pace. The share of solar energy is also increasing, but at a much more rapid pace, almost in a year-to-year basis. So that is a good sign. And in terms of our energy basket imports, we are still dependent. This year we hit a record 90% dependence, import dependence on crude oil, because we do not have enough domestic sources. Okay. For other things also, crude oil we are 85 to 90% dependent, natural gas again 40 to 50% dependent, coal also 20 to 25% we are dependent. We have a good amount of domestic reserves, but for coking coal, which is used for steel production, we do not have enough coking coal. So again, 85% of the coking coal comes from abroad. Okay. So this is regarding the energy basket that we currently have. Okay. Now let's take a look at the questions. The question once again, the question says, what steps are being taken to meet the continuously increasing demand of energy sources? Okay. So this is also, if you see this question, first part is saying what steps are being taken to increase the demand of energy sources in India, and discuss with special reference to renewable and sustainable energy. So discuss, so the emphasis of your answer has to be with respect to renewable and energy. So let's go back. I will erase this a bit. Okay. So when it comes to steps augmenting or increasing, okay, how we are augmenting our energy resources in India, we will first come to renewable energy. How are we doing that? We have number of schemes which are working in this domain. So we have the National Solar Mission. You can talk about the wind energy policy. Then we have the hydropower development. You can talk about the National Hydrogen Mission, Green Hydrogen Mission. Okay. Then we can talk about production linked incentive schemes for solar panels, etc. All right. That means the more you produce, the more incentive you get, right? Then we have schemes like Kusum, rooftop panels, solar rooftop panels, okay, and other schemes for related to bioenergy, which includes ethanol blending program, etc. So only major names also, if you are able to mention, this is good enough to justify renewable energy. Just make sure that you are touching base with solar, wind, hydropower, biopower, all sorts of powers, okay? And then you can mention the names of certain projects also. So for example, the biogas, bio-CNG plant in Indore, or you can talk about the Puga geothermal project in Ladakh. You can talk about the Jaisalmer wind park. You can talk about Mupandal wind farm in Tamil Nadu. So all the examples can be mentioned here. Then how we are augmenting other energy resources. This portion of your answer should occupy maximum weightage. So give this more in detail. Okay. This part has to be in detail. So we have to cover this with more examples, giving reference to each of the energy kinds. Okay. Then you can also talk about conventional energy sources. The 2/3 of your answer should focus on this part. 1/3 can come from here. So you can talk about reforms in coal sector. So for example, coal auctions, okay, auction. Then you have oil and gas exploration. So you have the help policy, you can mention that. You can talk about the strategic petroleum reserves. They support almost 10 to 15 days of our energy requirements. And you can talk about nuclear energy expansion. So you can mention this, okay. Then how we are also augmenting our, there is one aspect to this which we generally miss, which is energy efficiency. By improving our energy efficiency or consumption of energy, the way we are consuming it, we can also manage our electric or power resources, okay. How much supply do we really need? So for that, you know, you have the PAT scheme, which is the perform, achieve and trade scheme with respect to industrial energy efficiency, which is led by BEE. Then you have the Ujala scheme, which also talks about installing LED lighting, smart meters and grids, okay. You can also talk about improvement of grid storage, how we are improving our electricity storage, okay. So for that, we can talk about battery energy storage systems and pumped solar hydropowers. That can also be a project, or pumped storage projects. This comes under that, okay. Then to enhance our renewable energy from governance point of view or from the institutional point of view, from the institutional point of view, or governance point of view, we have, for example, made it mandatory for DISCOMs to purchase electricity from renewable projects. So renewable purchase obligations, which means we are expecting the power DISCOMs or power distribution companies to purchase electricity from solar parks, from wind farms, so that they are also incentivized to produce more. So renewable purchase obligations. Similarly, we have waived off inter-state transmission fee, especially when it comes to wind energy. So different schemes or different, they are also being done, okay. In terms of international framework, if I talk about international framework, you can definitely mention India's participation, or rather key role in International Solar Alliance. Okay, whose headquarters is in Gurugram in India. So you can mention that. So International Solar Alliance talks for one world, one sun, one world and one grid, okay. So for each of those sections, you can mention what are the different kinds of initiatives. Best is to mention it in a tabular format. More and more specific details that you give in the answer, the better your answer will be, okay. So this is related to the energy demand. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. In fact, we'll move on to the next year. Next year is 2024. Let's go back. In 2024, what are the questions that were asked by UPPCS? The first question, now these questions are we are going to find more of these questions in the answers, or rather in the paper going forward. Discuss the role of artificial intelligence in the safety and security during disaster management. Role of artificial intelligence in the safety and security during disaster management. So what additional services can artificial intelligence provide in disaster management? This is a very interesting question. In fact, this could also be a probable question coming forward in UPSC. Now, AI or artificial intelligence has very broad range of applications. And in disaster management, again, around the cycle or the disaster management cycle, that is risk prediction, early warning, after the event, recovery, rescue, everywhere artificial intelligence has a role to play. So if you're answering this question in terms of disaster management, it is always again better to mention it in the steps that are mentioned in the disaster management cycle. Let's first start with the first is risk prediction. Risk prediction means how do you assess whether this place is vulnerable to a particular hazard or not. So, for example, we can forecast floods, cyclones, earthquakes. So like in our previous answer, we talked about the technologies being used by, let's say, Indian Meteorological Department, okay? A huge amount of data is being collected by our Doppler weather radar stations. All this data can be analyzed at a much faster pace, at a much higher speed when it comes to analysis. So we can, at a very fast pace, we can determine that what are the trends, what are the different, let's say, different patterns that we see with respect to natural as well as industrial disasters. Both can be done. Okay. So that is related to risk prediction. That is, we are assessing what are the different patterns and anomalies. So big data, metadata can be analyzed at this stage. Let's move on to the next, early warning. Once you have analyzed the risk, once you have identified the potential hazards, then you can map your vulnerability and you can give early warning information dissemination to the people. For example, if there are fishermen who are out in the sea, early warning systems can be given to them, let's say through their boats or through satellite communication or through SMS, or simply to people living in coastal areas. You can use social media, you can use all sorts of print media, electronic media for warning dissemination. So early one is knowing whether a hazard is coming, second is disseminating that information, passing that information, communicating that this can help. Okay, AI can really help, because AI can generate these messages in local languages. It can generate multiple messages in a short span of time, and it can automatically send these messages. You don't have to wait for a human to send it. You can automate it that at every, let's say, 1 hour, one warning will go. Okay, so this can be automated, which reduces a lot of human error and risk involved. So early warning system is also a good way to use artificial intelligence. Next is, once the disaster has occurred, how can you manage the disaster? You can basically do the damage assessment or real-time disaster monitoring. For example, during the disaster, you can use drones, right? You can use live satellite images, CCTV images, collect all of them at one place, collect them, check them, and ask AI to calculate the damage assessment. What would have taken otherwise days or rather hours for humans to do, AI can do it within a matter of minutes. Let's say it can compare 2 satellite images of before and after. And in this comparison, AI can tell us that what is the extent of area that has been, for example, inundated with water in case of a flood situation. So AI can monitor the situation real time at a very fast pace, and it can identify the blockages, the problems, the infrastructure issues in a very short span. Rescue and search. Rescue and search, AI also has a very important role to play. So for example, resource allocation, it can decide. Drones can be sent. There are robotic drones which are being used in Japan also for identification of people who are probably trapped inside rubble in the case of an earthquake. Okay. Route optimization for ambulances, for effective rescue services, for operational logistics. All these things can be done by AI. AI can also use chatbots for missing person reporting. You don't have to call one helpline number. Simply go to the chatbot and people can enter the details, and it can do a fast matching also. So technology can make things what would have taken hours for human beings to do, technology can do that in minutes for us. Okay. Then in recovery or resilience or rehabilitation, once the rescue relief operations are completed, in terms of long-term rehabilitation, AI can help in identifying safer zones for reconstruction. What is the kind of buildings that should be again established? What is safer? What urban plannings can be done better? And climate resilient infrastructure can be designed. Blockages can be identified. People behavior can be checked. You can check for what was the relief supplies that were less, which were more in demand during disaster. Then accordingly, preparedness can be done for the next cycle. So all the metadata that is being collected during a disaster event can be collated by AI from all sources, analyzed and given proven output or proper let's say analysis of what could have been done. Okay, so this is related to what all AI can do in a disaster management scenario. Let's see some examples of what is actually happening. Okay, so here for example, in terms of let's say in terms of preparedness, when we talk about preparedness, so cyclone prediction in Bangladesh. So again, like we saw in India in 1999 when cyclone took place, almost 1 lakh, Odisha, 1 lakh people died. Now we have almost 0 deaths, and which is an achievement of IMD, which is again an achievement of technology. Okay, avalanche forecasting can be done in is being done in places like Switzerland. In USA, artificial intelligence and drones are being used to detect wildfires, especially in California region. Again, India, artificial intelligence is being used to predict flood warning. So you combine the river basin data, what the river basin is, match it with the amount of rainfall that is or precipitation that is happening, and club the two data to calculate how much and what would be the extent of the flood. So AI can be used for that also. Similarly, in Indonesia, for tsunami alert systems, AI is being used. Okay, in rescue and relief operations, like I said, also in AI has some very interesting examples. So for example, like you see here in Japan, we have robot dogs which are assisting people in identifying humans trapped under the rubble in case of earthquakes. Then in Turkey, again, in building collapses, drones were used for debris cleaning. Thermal vision can locate stranded victims. In fact, unfortunately, even in the recent techie case that we saw, the person was stranded in water for a very long time, but had we had the right equipment and resources, probably a drone could have gone and given him a life jacket, or some sort of help could have been done remotely without actually human beings going there. So this is the kind of technology that we definitely need to adopt in order to be better prepared. Okay, Mexico, disaster response chatbots. Chatbots can directly interact with people. What is the problem they are facing, where they are stranded, send their location, rescue them, again, connect them to their loved ones. All sorts of activities can be done by artificial intelligence. So there is a huge scope for AI when it comes to disaster management across the world. So this question was very broad, again, like I said, but it is an 8 marker. So one has to, again, be very specific, give examples. The more examples you give in your answer, the more your answer will stand out. Finally, the last question that was asked in 2024, which is a 12-marker question. What are ecologically sensitive areas in India? Mention the policies of Government of India for their protection. Ecologically sensitive areas. So let's see what are ecologically sensitive areas. Ecologically sensitive areas are geographically distinct regions. They have fragile or ecologically important areas, you can say ecosystems, which have special protection, okay, and they act as shock absorbers between protected areas. Generally, ecological sensitive areas are identified if this is a protected area, which could be either a national park or a wildlife sanctuary or any other protected area. And ecologically sensitive area is usually a buffer zone around that area. Now, Supreme Court has made it mandatory or mandated it for the state governments to identify the ecological sensitive areas in their respective states. The states are still in the process of doing so. Recently, we saw the unfortunate news, we read about the unfortunate news of the passing away of Mr. Madhav Gadgil, who was a key person in the Western Ghats ecology expert panel, and he made it, in fact, in his recommendation, he suggested that Western Ghats, a majority proportion of the Western Ghats should be declared as an ecologically sensitive area. Okay. So what is an ecologically sensitive area? It is not a statutorily protected area by, let's say, the Wildlife Protection Act, no, but it is a sensitive area which primarily lies between to or around a protected area, which has been established by law. Okay. Characteristics is there is high biodiversity and endemism. There is still, the area still has high, good amount of flora and faunal diversity. It is a fragile ecosystem. The ecosystem still needs protection. Okay. There is presence of protected areas around, and it has rich ecosystem. So it is not like in nature you have a protected area, this is forest, and suddenly aspas you can build cities and infrastructure. No, the surrounding region also supports or provides ecosystem services, buffer services to the protected area. So this is also equally important in terms of water and climate regulation, soil protection. And this is also vulnerable to anthropogenic pressures. So government policies, some of the government policies that we have had in place to protect the ecologically sensitive areas are, number one, like I told you, Supreme Court has made it mandated that the state government should identify the ecologically sensitive zones around protected areas under the Environment Protection Act 1986. So what this will do, this will regulate all the activities around the protected areas. Okay, there are some activities, there's a range of activities which are either completely prohibited in these areas, that means cannot be done at all. There are some activities which are regulated, that means they can be done but with the permission of the forest department, and then there are some activities which are permitted in these areas. So a range of those activities are also mentioned here, can be mentioned here in order to explain that how regulation of different activities being done in the ecological sensitive areas. Then Western Ghats, for example, under the recommendation of the Gadgil Committee and the Kasturi Rangan Committee, certain regions have been classified as ecologically sensitive areas. Coastal regulation zones, this notification also supports ecologically sensitive zones along India's coastline. So they are covered under coastal regulation zones. Wildlife Protection Act, since it mandates the creation of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, etc., and talks about specific projects such as Project Tiger, Project Elephant, etc., these projects also help in the conservation of ecologically sensitive areas because they are usually around the protected areas. Environmental impact assessment, this is also important because it is mandatory to take EIA approval for projects in such areas. National Biodiversity Act, which has been established under the Convention on Biological Diversity, also aims to conserve the biodiversity and traditional knowledge of the communities of India. So People's Biodiversity Register, for example, protects the traditional knowledge of people with respect to, let's say, plant and genetic resources. National Action Plan on Climate Change, again, is an umbrella scheme which deals with, let's say, National Mission for Sustaining Himalayan Ecosystem is one of its component. So basically, again, deals with ecologically sensitive areas. And certain judicial interventions, like I told, Supreme Court had said around protected areas, 1 kilometer of ecologically sensitive zones should be identified, but all states have not implemented yet. They are still in the process of doing so. So this is regarding judicial intervention. Finally, you can end your answer by talking about challenges in ESA protection. So what are the challenges when it comes to ecologically sensitive areas? Number one, you can talk about delay, that state governments have not yet identified these areas and there are no notifications. So when an area is not notified, how will it be protected? So this delay is being done. This is very, very important. It comes in conflict with the development and livelihoods of the people living in those areas. They may not be classified as traditional forest dwellers and they may not have rights under the Forest Rights Act. So there is an issue there. There is opposition from people due to fear of land use restrictions, because if an area may be classified as an ecologically sensitive area, then activities like lumbering, activities like gathering of minor forest produce may be impacted because of these restrictions. And that is why people are opposed to the idea of declaring it a ecologically sensitive area. And of course, there is weak enforcement on the ground. So what is the way forward? How can we protect this area? Involve people, participatory governance, get people on board. So for example, we have community reserves. In the case of community reserves in India, there is a formation of a joint committee, which includes people from the land or community owners of the particular area and people from the state forest department. So together they form a part of the joint committee and that takes decisions with respect to what happens in that area. So some sort of a participatory approach where joint decision making is enabled or joint forest management is enabled, and that will allow for more, let's say, people will oppose the enforcement of ESA less. Scientific mapping can be done as for those areas which are definitely very important and very critically important, and those which are still, let's say, more on the commercial side. Livelihood friendly conservation, so that minor forest produce, timber, honey, lark, all these things are not affected. Okay, and clear communication to avoid misinformation, so that people are made well aware of their rights, people are well aware of their rights and their responsibilities towards the ecologically sensitive areas. So on this note, we conclude the discussion of the questions that have been asked by the UPPCS examination in the last 2 years in environment and disaster management sections. Thank you very much.